blog post last week for deramores.com, which is where I have my technical posts in both knitting and crocheting, and that is blog.deramores.com. Anyway, I did a post on the quickest and easiest provisional cast-on that I know for knitters. Now, it is a variation on the crochet provisional cast-on, but I'm always afraid that if I call it a crochet cast-on that people who are not excellent crocheters will be afraid to try it. So I'm here to tell you, you need a crochet hook for this cast-on, but you don't need to be an ace crocheter. It's just not that hard. So I have my Deramores Vintage Chunky Yarns, and I'm going to start with any color. This is waste yarn. The provisional cast-on is waste yarn, so it doesn't matter what color you have, what yarn you have really, but I'm using a bulky weight yarn for my cast-on because it was a bulky weight yarn for my sample. And I'm using blue because my sample project is pink and I want to be able to see the difference between the provisional cast-on and the actual knitting. And the size of the crochet hook doesn't really matter. I want a hook that is useful for the yarn that I'm using. It doesn't matter so far as the gauge of the stitch goes. So I wouldn't use lace weight yarn with a big giant hook, but since this is a bulky weight yarn, I have a 6.5 millimeter hook in my hand, and that's close enough. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a slip knot on the crochet hook. And there that is. So there is my slip knot on my crochet hook. I'm going to grab my knitting needle and I'm going to hold the tip of the knitting needle next to the crochet hook. So I'm going to bring my yarn under the knitting needle, over the knitting needle and over the hook, and then I'm just going to draw that loop through the loop that's already on the hook. Now if you know how to crochet, basically what I'm doing here is a chain one. And that's the whole ball game. So now look, I have one loop on the crochet hook and one loop on the knitting needle. Now I'm going to continue to make stitches. The yarn comes under the knitting needle, over the knitting needle and around, both the knitting needle and the hook. Grab that loop that is closer to the hook, pull it through the loop that was already on the hook. And I'm going to go do this all the way across. I think I'll do 6. So 1, 2, 3. This is number 3. 4. Oops, I split my yarn there. 5, 6. Now, to end my provisional cast on, what I'm going to do is make just a couple of chains to make sure that it's hanging out of my way. If you know how to chain, of course, you just chain 3 or 4 or whatever makes sure you happy. If you don't know how to chain, just bring the yarn over the hook. Bring that loop through the loop that's already on the hook. Basically like you've been doing, but this time you can miss the knitting needle. Now, I'm going to cut the yarn for the cast on. Remember, this can be waste yarn. It can be whatever you want. Now, if I was going to knit just a couple of rows and then go back and unzip that cast on, I could just leave the tail hanging like it is. If I'm a nervous type or it's going to be a little while, all I need to do is take the cut end and put it through the loop. Now I don't want to tug that tightly because I want to be able to undo it later. So I'm just going to pull it up a little bit so it's out of my way. Okay, now to knit. I'm going to get rid of the crochet hook because I don't need it anymore. And grab my second knitting needle and my other color of yarn. Now I'm knitting with the project yarn. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit like I always do. Now this cast on does not work when there's purls in the front row. So I need to make sure that, first I need to make sure I'm working with my working yarn and not my tail yarn. I want to make sure that I'm not doing ribbing or anything with a purl row. I'm going to do this whole row across and knit. Now, if you look at the bottom, the way it's angled up, you can see that it looks like a little column of V's. right there, and then there's my chain that I don't need. We're going to hang that around for later. Okay, I'm going to stop right now. I'm just going to knit a couple rows. Now it doesn't matter. I can knit, purl, do lace, whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to just do a couple more rows so you can see what I'm doing, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to unzip the provisional cast on. Okay, I've put a couple of rows of stockinette stitch on my crochet provisional cast on, and now I want to show you how to take it out. If you flip it over to the back, we had 6 stitches, correct? We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ruh-roh, where'd that last one go? It's kind of hanging out in the air, and the reason that is because this is a piece of cut yarn. I just started with a cut edge. I started my project knowing that I could weave it in later. So when I'm unpulling this, I need to remember when I'm going back and knitting in the other direction that I need to either yarn over, use this little piece of yarn to make sure that my stitches come out to the number that I want. All right, so here's my chain. First thing I'm going to do is pull the tail out of that little loop to make sure it's gone. All right, now I'm going to undo the chains. These were just the extra chains we had hanging out. I'm just going to get rid of those first. Now I'm going to get rid of the first. Now again, this would be a live stitch, but it's going to be a little difficult for it to hang out on the needle because it's just a piece of cut yarn at the moment. Now, as I go across, every time I pull a chain out, I'm going to leave a live stitch when I'm going to put on my needle. So I'm going to pull this yarn right here, and that's going to leave me a live stitch, and I'm going to bring the needle from away from me towards me to get it up on the needle. Here we go all the way across. Pull one out, go back to front, pull one out, go back to front. Now, again, you can pull all the stitches out if you want and then put them on a needle if you're feeling daring. You could pull out 3 or 4 at a time. I'm just going one at a time so you can absolutely see what I'm doing. And that last one's got a lot of waste yarn. So there's my last stitch. Oh, look, I got a little split there. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that tail that's just kind of hanging out. I'm leaving it on top of the needle to remember that I kind of have to deal with it later. Now I want to get the rest of that provisional cast on out of here. So all I'm going to do is tug both sides to make sure that that slip stitch goes away. And now it's gone. And all I have to do is pull it out. Now, I had a little change of plans here. I decided what I would do is to go ahead and knit the next row in the contrast color so you can see how neatly it all lines up. So I have my knitting needle. I turned my work around so the right side was facing me. And I'm going to go ahead and knit my first row. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember, I got this tail hanging out. That's my 6th stitch. So I'm just going to knit through the front of what would have been a yarn over. Tug it down. So now I have my 6 stitches, and you can see how neatly they line up. They're coming exactly out of the other end of the stitches. In fact, let me just put a purl row on there real quick and show you the front one more time. I picked noisy knitting needles. I'll have to get my bamboo ones out for the next video. And you can see how the stitches line up perfectly. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me. I'm very glad you stopped by. You can get all kinds of new craft videos here on Hooked for Life with Mary Beth Temple, so please consider subscribing to the channel. You can get the photo tutorial for this particular video on blog.daramores.com, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see. Thanks so much. Bye.